Good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture. I'm Shauna Riley of the Scripps Howard Center and thank you for joining us. For tonight's 6 at 6 lecture, the 6 at 6 lecture series is a series of 6-ish lectures where we bring topics of interest to the community. For those of you joining us online, there is a chat box to enter questions. They'll come to me on my phone and I will ask them on your behalf. For those of you in the audience, when you have a question, we'll run you up a microphone. Probably not literally running, but you get my idea. We are joined tonight for our 15th season of 6 at 6 lecture, or the 6 at 6 lecture series, for Politics at Play, how the Olympics serve as the front line for political theater. First, I'd like to thank the COI for giving us the room for the evening as part of Comm Week, the Norse Media team who is streaming it for us tonight and providing technical and emotional support. And so we have two folks joining us from the Associated Press. We have Will Graves, who has worked for nearly 3 decades as a sports journalist, including 20 years at the Associated Press. He's an award-winning national writer based in Pittsburgh. He covers a wide variety of sports, including each of the last 9 Olympics. A native of Washington, D.C., and a graduate of West Virginia University, Graves lives in suburban Pittsburgh with his wife, Ellie, and their 2 teenage children. Eddie Pells is in his 34th year with the Associated Press. Most of the time has been covering a variety of sports. He just completed his coverage of his 14th Olympics. He also works on issues and people surrounding college sports and the intersection of money, power, and sports. Based in Denver, Pells has a wife and 13-year-old twins who are bigger Bronco fans than he is. And with that, I'd like to invite them to start their lecture.
Are we just going to do this like side by side? Hi guys, I'm Will. This is Eddie. You can decide which one's the good-looking one. I've already decided. We really appreciate the opportunity to come out here. Candidly, Oscar Dixon, the sports editor for the AP, called me in January and said, "Hey, you want to go to NKU?" And I knew Stacy Jankowski, the great professor here. And I was like, yeah, great. He's like, okay, we want you to write about the intersection of Olympics and geopolitics. And I was like, wait, what? And gave us no direction outside of that. So Ed and I talked, and I called him. Oscar called me first. And then I called Eddie and said, hey, Oscar's going to call you with a proposition. Just know that I'm the other person. And because
I said yes anyway, right?
And because Eddie's such a great mentor to me and been such a good friend to me through the years, he has... He agreed. He was in Indianapolis for the Final Four and decided to stay over for a few days and come hang out. So what we're going to do tonight is sort of talk to you a little bit about the Olympics. And the Olympics, let me go back to the first one. I got stuff prepared.
Trigger happy.
You know, we're lucky. We have, and if some of us have heard us say this already today, at the AP in sports, the only thing worse than covering the Olympics is not covering the Olympics. I think Eddie and I, it is a unique event for many, many reasons. We've talked to it in some classes today, to some students today. But what we thought we would do was sort of talk a little bit about what the Olympics in theory mean and then sort of what the reality is. You know, you look at this is the Olympic rings. It's an iconic symbol. I think most people that pay any attention to sports at all know that when these rings flash up, kind of what they mean. And, you know, the Olympics have a motto that, like, it's sort of like the 5 rings represent the 5 continents. They count the Americas as one, so just in case there's, well, if I didn't want to get actually here on that. And it's sort of like the union of sports coming together. It was supposed to be, when the modern Olympics originated in 1896, it was supposed to be about sort of, you know, just keeping it, what did they say, just shut up and dribble, but like it was supposed to be just sports. None of the other stuff. And I think back then in 1896, it was easier because we were all sort of separated. I didn't know what was, you didn't know what was going on in Australia or Asia or Africa unless you read the newspaper or the Associated Press being featured in those newspapers back then. But that is, it was sort of inevitable that we were going to get to a point where politics were going to, intercede in some of this stuff. And I think what has happened over the years is people have recognized that the platform has become so big that, one of the things that people don't know about the Olympics is, like, it is actually just the world championships for all of these different sports in the same place at the same time. And the events themselves, whether it's the gymnastics or track like Eddie does, the meets themselves are operated by the federations, the World Athletics, the International Gymnastics Federation, and the IOC sort of oversees all of it. But we don't hear about protests at the track and field games and at the World Championships. We don't hear about protests at the gymnastics championships. We hear about protests at the Olympics because what's happened is the athletes have realized how big the audience is and how the reach is greater at an Olympics than it would be at any sort of world championship. And to be honest with you, so they view the Olympics as a chance to sort of not right or wrong, but bring an issue to light that's important to them. And host countries have figured out over the years that the Olympics can be as a platform to sort of legitimize their status on the world stage. And so they are using the Olympics as sort of like a political tool in their own right, even if it's not as blatantly obvious as as what we're going to show you here with this first slide, Ed.
All right, here we go.
All right.
And I think just to kick into this slide, if I can, the Olympics were always were first presented to us as a peaceful gathering of nations, okay? Once you've got the word nations in there, you basically wadded up any chance that it was going to be a peaceful, non-political bunch of people playing water polo. And that, I think the next 45 minutes or however long we're here, we're gonna give you example after example of that, starting right here.
All right, so I didn't know what the setup was going to be, so I actually, in a rare move for me, actually wrote a bunch of narrative stuff because I thought I was going to be standing up there or whatever. I understand, but I didn't want to be the old guy lecturing, so the pretty words that I wrote I'm not going to get to, but I'm going to try to get to remember the meat and potatoes of this. I was in Cortina at the recently completed Milan Cortina Olympics. In Cortina, we had women's skiing, which I wrote a lot about. We had curling, which I ended up writing a lot about because Shauna's countrymen from Canada can't keep their potty mouths to themselves. And there was also the sliding events up there, the curling skeleton, bobsled, luge, which brings us to probably the most compelling political moment of the Olympics. And this is Vladislav Hraskovich of the Ukraine. He is a world-class slider, and he wanted to wear this helmet at the Olympics, which highlights Ukrainian athletes who have been killed during the Ukraine-Russia war. And the IOC was like, hey, look, there are ways that you can protest this. You can wear a little black band if you want to memorialize your countrymen, but you can't wear, you cannot wear that helmet and compete. Now, what was interesting here was they let him practice and compete. They let him practice with it. And the cameras are there, the cameras are rolling, his message is getting across, but the day he was supposed to compete, Kirsty Coventry, who is she's the president, what's the title, official title? Who's the president of the International Olympic Committee, they met. They had a tearful meeting, and she was like, look, we have a lot of empathy for where you're feeling, but you cannot wear that helmet. And he was like, cool, I'm not going to ride. And that's how strongly he felt about doing this. I mean, he was the flag bearer at the opening ceremonies for Ukraine. And look, I mean, we can talk. I have a thing where I believe very strongly that sort of like the world, if you win the world championships, it's the same, from a competitive standpoint, it's the same as winning the Olympics, because it's the same people. It's the same people. But the Olympics, the athletes will say, Will, you're an idiot. The Olympics are different because that's when the world is really, really watching what you can do. He decided to sacrifice that so that he could bring this, this experience to honor his teammates, his fallen countrymen in this way. And this is what Vladislav said, which is something that I think as we go through these slides, you'll become like a common theme. He said, sometimes it feels like all these hours of training, we really forgot about the overall mission of sports. He said this at the UN a couple of weeks ago. It is not only about the medals, but it's about the values that we represent. And he decided, very nobly, in my opinion, to sacrifice the opportunity for individual glory. If you're an Olympic champion, Eddie and I know this. That is when we write your obit, whenever you might pass away, it will say Olympic champion so and so who won gold at whatever get. That is how important it was. He sacrificed that sort of personal gain to raise. We're still talking about it. I mean, a lot of the stuff at the games, even the curling. We even stopped talking about the curling, which I never thought we were going to do. But we are still talking about this, and that's how compelling and sort of personal this moment was. And hard not to feel for everybody. I mean, Kirsty Coventry was in tears when she was talking to the press after the IOC's decision. That's how hard it was. But I mean, this dude stood up for his fellow Ukrainians, and it was a very powerful moment in Cortina. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a rule. We're going to get back to this time and again over this. It's called Rule 50, and it basically bans essentially political protest at the Olympics. How they enforce it, it seems to be different every time you look at it, but I'm just bringing that up because it's gonna keep coming up. And Vladislav got nailed by that. There are other people who have too, and other people who've done their own thing, and nobody's ever said a word. All right, let's move to the next thing. This is Eileen Gu. Anybody recognize her? She's, okay, good. So she is one of the most interesting characters that we've covered at the Olympics. She was born in San Francisco, raised in San Francisco. Her mom's from China, and she was always going to be the best free skier probably in the world. That's been kind of in the works since she was about 14 or 15. And the decision for her became, what country are you going to compete for? Now, one of the things that I find interesting about her kind of sports and snowboarding is that, like Will was saying, they go around all 4 years, their whole lives doing these competitions. And if you go to an average half-pipe contest, the X Games or a World Championships, you're just not going to see a lot of flags. They don't really talk about what countries they go for. They just want to do cool shit and watch other people do that, and then some judges will decide who's best. But when it comes to the Olympics, because it's a peaceful gathering of nations, you're competing for a country. You can't just walk in and say, I'm Eddie Pells, I'm here to do cool stuff. What country are you for? Her decision basically came down to, do you want to compete for the US or do you want to compete for China? Because she had, that's another issue. She's got Chinese citizenship. We don't know how that all works, and I'm not, maybe someday we're going to find out. Her decision to listen to her tell it was that she felt like if she could compete for China, she might have a better way of opening up skiing and snowboarding to a whole new contingent of people. There's a couple billion people in China, and I think in a lot of respects that has worked very well. Eileen is, probably smarter than all of us. She's also a model. She goes to Stanford. She's got all kinds of things going for her. And she inserted herself into this debate because I think one of the big issues with her is, if you grew up in America and you trained in America and you got your education in America, why are you turning your back on America? She doesn't look at it like that. She looks at herself as being kind of a warrior for inclusion and helping get more girls involved. But this is an example, no matter how you feel about it, of a really fantastic athlete being part of a political debate. And while we were in Italy, one of the headlines that brought this whole issue up again was when J.D. Vance sort of said, well, I don't know about you, but I think if you grow up in America, you ought to compete for America. So then, of course, the rounds of questioning came to Eileen, but thankfully for Eileen, she basically she doesn't get tripped up by this stuff, and she keeps in on the inclusion conversation. And that takes us to our next, this was taken somewhere in Milan.
Correct.
So another big issue that happened at the Olympics we were just at was President Trump came out and made some comments about some athletes and put those athletes kind of under the microscope. And what that all originated from was right when the Olympics started was all the stuff with ICE was going on in Minneapolis, okay? So many of the US athletes were asked, they didn't come out and do this by themselves, but they were asked, what do you think about what's going on in Minneapolis? How do you feel representing America? A fair enough question, but certainly not something that any of the skiers who were being interviewed this one day were looking to talk about. One of the athletes, I don't know if anybody heard of the tale of Hunter Hess. He's a free skier. not very well known, and he basically just said, I love America, I'm not that excited about everything that's going on in America right now. Trump found out about it and Truth Social, that Hunter Hess was a great big loser and maybe we don't need him competing for America either. Now suddenly you have an international incident, and somebody brought up the idea that I thought was very interesting. We're talking about using the Olympics for your platform, and we're going to talk about several examples of this coming up. This was almost a case where the media was driving it the other way. Hunter Hess didn't really want, he wasn't coming to the Olympics to make a statement about ice, but he was asked a question. He gave an honest answer, which really wasn't that, if you take it into context, it wasn't anything that controversial. He didn't say he hated America. He got on the president's radar, and then actually he was getting threats, death threat, everything that you might think about after something like that would happen happened to him. And the irony of it all was that, or the sort of weirdness of it was that he made the statement at the beginning of the Olympics. His event wasn't until the very end, so he actually had to wait, he had 2 weeks where he had to let this all play out before he actually got on the hill to ski. And then after his opening round, when he was done, he did this. He flashed a loser sign on his thing. So it brought it all up again, because we were wondering, what's he going to do? What's he going to say? That's what he did, and he came back and said, I love America. I wish this wouldn't have happened. But it was a very visceral example of the way that kind of the world we're in now. It's not always the athlete using the platform. Sometimes it can be the media, the president, whoever, using their platform to put the athletes on the record. After Hess got asked about that, then it was basically like every American athlete that got in front of a microphone had to answer a question about this political issue, which I'm sure they did have opinions about, and I think that they should be articulate enough to have to answer it, but a lot of them just want to go there and ski. But when you put all these flags up, it turns it into a different thing, which brings us to Nazi Germany.
Great.
I get to turn it over to Will.
I'm so glad you assigned me this one. Look, so a lot of times, as Eddie just mentioned, and as I mentioned in the opening, that the protest or the political aspect of this is introduced by the athletes themselves. This was not the case in Berlin in 1936. After the games were awarded to Berlin, Hitler came into power. The Third Reich sort of was rising. The Nazi Party was rising in Germany, and he instituted before the games, a couple years before the games, he made it to where all of the, and I'm sorry, this is a pretty delicate subject. I wanted to make sure I was right on this, so forgive me here. They wanted to make sure that all the government-sponsored athletic organizations implemented an Aryans-only policy, so that he could promote, hey, when the games come here, we're going to show the world that the Aryans, we got our blonde hair, we got our blue eyes, we're going to show the world what's what. Jesse Owens had no part of that. And by the way, I'll notice that the IOC protested, hey man, you shouldn't be doing this. And notice the trend here, they did not do anything to actually penalize Germany. They didn't take the games away. That's the last thing the IOC ever wants to do. So what happens is, Jesse Owens and 17 other black athletes show up and compete, and they kick a fair amount of ass, if I can use a bad word. Since Eddie opened the door here, I'm walking through it. But so in this, obviously, this is a pretty telling picture. Jesse Owens, had no, to borrow a phrase that Muhammad Ali, who we'll talk about in a minute, used, and he had no quarrel necessarily with the Germans at this point. But what happened in Berlin is sort of like there's a little bit of lore going on there. Initially, it was said that Hitler snubbed him, and then you read further that Jesse admitted later that they had Hitler was in sort of victory stand or some box or whatever, and they kind of nodded politely at each other, and the IOC said, hey, look, you either got to congratulate all the athletes or you congratulate none of the athletes. And Hitler said, well, I just won't congratulate any of the athletes. I'm not going to shake hands with anybody. And look, the performance on the field of play at those Olympics showcased that, hey, maybe the Aryans are going to have to, maybe you're going to have to make room for everybody else here. But what was more interesting and maybe more telling about what happened when Jesse Owens and the other black athletes that represented the U.S. in Berlin got home. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, invited the white Olympic athletes to the White House for a celebration. They did not invite Jesse Owens or any of the other medal winners or any of the other black competitors at those Olympics. The story goes that FDR, 36, it's an election year, he's finishing up his first term, and he did not want this is 1936, we're kind of limited in terms of our media capacity, but he didn't want the picture of black men and women in the White House sort of standing on equal footing with the president to be published, because he was trying to, the South was still obviously highly segregated at that time, and he didn't want to lose votes in a swing part of the country. I wrote this, so I'm just going to read it, okay?
Okay, yeah.
90 years later, the image of Owens in Berlin and the lack of an image of FDR honoring Owens back home is very telling of both where both countries were, not just not just Germany, but the United States at the time.
And I think we'll go to the next one. I think this sort of stands as sort of moment one when we all started to realize we ain't just going there to run track. Okay, which is a good segue into this picture.
All right, now because I didn't know Eric Crawford's son was here. Okay, one of the scions of Louisville media. Okay, I'm a little hesitant, but I worked in Louisville earlier in my career. I spent 6 years working for our bureau there, which is actually in the Courier Journal building in downtown Louisville, a few blocks from the Muhammad Ali Center. I actually saw Ali once. There was a thing for the celebration anniversary for the Rumble in the Jungle. And I don't get starstruck that much, even in my older age, but I was like, holy bleep, Muhammad Ali is like right there. And he was like, Parkinson's he was basically incommunicative at that point. He was debilitated, but it was still powerful to be in his presence. Now look, this is him. He won light heavyweight gold medal, as I'm sure everybody that's born in Kentucky probably knows, at the 1960 Olympics. What's interesting about this, Muhammad Ali did zero political protest at those Olympics. But what's interesting was 15 years later, in his autobiography, which was helped with, whether it's semantics, whether it was a biography or an autobiography, he said that he threw his gold medal from winning the Olympics into the river, into the Ohio River, that he went over the 2nd Street Bridge and he chucked it into the water. What's interesting to me about and nobody really knows whether that actually happened, is sort of part of one of the eternal mysteries around Ali. But what's interesting is that he waited until 1975 to sort of reveal this. And why did he do that? Because by then he had converted, he'd become a Muslim, and he was developing a reputation as a humanitarian around the world. And I think that he understood the symbol. He said that he threw the medal over the bridge because right after he got back to Louisville, after he'd been feted in New York City with a bunch of other Olympians, he went to go and try to get something to eat, and he was refused service. And in that moment, shortly after that, he says that he threw his medal over the bridge and into the water. But the timing of that revelation is interesting because he had recognized something. First, he had built up a well-deserved reputation as somebody that understood that there was much going on in the world than just standing across a ring from somebody and trying to beat their lights out. He'd already been, as people know, like he refused to be inducted into the draft for the Vietnam War. And I think that Ali understood that, whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter, but the story of one of the great fighters I would say of oppressed or lesser people of his generation, understood that what the Olympic symbol means and what the discarding of it means. And I think that, what's powerful about that is that we're now, 80 years into the Olympic movement, and I think that brand had become sort of ubiquitous enough for people to understand the powerful image. Like, even if you think about Ali chucking that into the water, and at the height of in the early part of his life, is very telling of sort of how much work the United States still had to do. And by the time he revealed that, he had earned enough clout to say it, and it wasn't people who were like, oh, this is Ali just being Ali looking for attention. So the discarding of an Olympic, the ultimate Olympic emblem, was sort of a powerful way of sort of his own repudiation of sort of what was going on in the United States.
And that goes perfectly into this next one, which is really going to be probably the image of the Olympics. This is what our lecture is about. This is, I'm sure you've probably heard of Tommy Smith and John Carlos. This was a statue of that, what they did at the 1968 Olympics. It was the black-fisted, black power salute. And this is the exact opposite of what I was talking about earlier. This is two athletes who know exactly where they are and know exactly what they're doing and exactly what they want to say. This was in 1968, and it merges with the Ali stuff because that was starting to, he was becoming more outspoken at this time. And they're on the podium. We've got riots and protests breaking out all over the United States. This was a time there were only 3 networks, and everybody's watching this one. And they went ahead, I'm not really sure they looked at this as taking a chance, but there was a coalition of black athletes at that time that were all trying to figure out how can we make a statement. And this is using your platform at the Olympics to make a political statement about what's going on in your country. Now, what happened to them? We talked about Rule 50. They got kicked out. They got sent home for violating Rule 50, and the USOC didn't really back them. And it literally took until I started covering the USOC about 25 years ago for them to actually be recognized and get brought back into the family of the US Olympics, which is absolutely insane, not just based on what they won, but what they did. And they became sort of the baseline for how do you use your platform to send a message. And I also think the penalty that they paid by sort of being excised and getting in trouble and not being supported, I think also informed hundreds and hundreds of athletes for years and years about whether they wanted to use sports to make political statements. We remember, the Michael Jordan quote was, Republicans buy shoes too. He didn't want to get into any of that, and not until, I think, Colin Kaepernick with the kneeling, which happened about, 10, 15 years ago, did athletes become comfortable again using their platform. So this is sort of the, ground zero of using the Olympics as a political tool, basically, to send a message. And then this next one will just be, 4 years later, we had the massacre of a dozen or 13 Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics. That's a political statement by Palestinians. Obviously, an easy place to find lots of Israelis, an easy place to send a message, and an easy place to really get everybody's attention. Again, this would have made big news now, but everybody was watching that, and it was horrific, and it was a bit of a wake-up call for the Olympics to at least try to reckon with the idea that, as I said before, we're not just coming here to swim and shoot rifles. This is an international event with international stakes that go well beyond playing games. All right, I'm going to move to this next one here.
Which leads us...
Now a little more uplifting.
Well, sort of. So which leads us to, if you're of a certain age, I'm 51, Ed's a couple years older than I am. If you ask anybody of our generation or older, what is the most famous moment in Olympic history? I wouldn't even qualify that by saying United States Olympic history. I would say Olympic history. It's this. This is the Miracle on Ice. This is the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York. This is Jim Craig, the goaltender here. And I'm sorry, apologize. It's Strobel. I apologize to the Strobel family. I forgot your first name. This is after they beat the Russians. The Russians had a professional team. This is at the height of the Cold War. I grew up outside Washington, D.C., about 20-ish miles. And I had a fixation growing up about what the blast radius was if a nuclear missile hit downtown D.C. or Andrews Air Force Base, which was about 10 to 12 miles from where I grew up. It's hard to overstate, if you were alive at the time, the the different, like literally, like we were the good guys and they were the bad guys. The problem was when these games came along, things weren't going so hot in America. The Jimmy Carter administration, such as it was, wasn't doing real well. And about a few months, 3 months before this, in November, I believe, a bunch of American hostages were taken in Iran. It is, I'm going to try to avoid real political statements, but that was 46 years ago. And I just think about where we are literally as we stand here today. Mm-hmm. The Russians had a super team. They were professionals. They were grown men. They were the Big Red Machine. They were considered the best team, one of the best teams in any sport in the history of the Olympic movement. A bunch of college kids, coached by Herb Brooks, stunned them one night. And actually, the actual, this is how long ago it was, the actual game itself was on tape delay. Like, they didn't air it live. Like, people sort of heard through the grapevine. I think the game was played in the middle of the afternoon, and ABC aired it at night. And by then, it had been reported on TV news or whatever that, hey, the Americans won this game. And it is, I mean, Al Michaels' very famous call, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. These kids did not play hockey that day to make any sort of political statement. But it's telling that this was not the gold medal. This wasn't for the gold medal. This game was not for the gold medal. The Americans had to beat Finland in the next game to win the gold medal. But the symbol of the plucky upstart American kids beating the big bad Russians in the United States made a lot of people that had not watched 1 second of hockey in their lives care a lot about hockey. It's one of the reasons Mike Eruzione, who scored the game-winning goal for the Americans in this game, has never paid for a lunch in 46 years. And I've interviewed Mike before. I'm pretty sure that's pretty close to being true. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about, the influence of the games over the world themselves, I mean, like the hostages stayed, they weren't freed for another 11 months until Ronald Reagan became president. But the impact of this in terms of not only sort of uplifting momentarily the spirits of the Americans at that time and sort of giving, oh man, we beat the Russians at their kind of one of their own things. No offense to Canada. Sorry, Canada wasn't in that, Shauna. But like that's how powerful the Olympics are. Now, I mean, I don't know what you guys did during the gold medal game this year where we played the big bad Canadians, the Americans did. And my daughter had a swim meet. I'd actually come home from the games the day before because the stuff where I was at was over. And there were dozens of parents, the swim meet's going on, and they're at their phones watching the game, and the scores being relayed over the PA at this meet with a bunch of like teenage kids. A lot of those people had never watched hockey before. They weren't going to watch hockey again. But when you drape the flag in anything, suddenly it takes on a greater meaning. And this, I'm not going to say that the end of the Cold War started by winning this game, but I think that if you could certainly draw a very faint line to this moment as one of many things that happen over the next 10 years to sort of give what the West in general hope that, hey, maybe the quote, good guys will win in the end. And I think sort of the way that it reinforced our position as sort of the moral authority on things. And if this was some world championship game, it's not the same. If it was the Russians had killed them in the run up to this several times. Mm-hmm. But they beat them, the Americans beat them the one time that everybody was watching, and the impact on that is lasted for years.
And I think, just to tag on to that, in the political science, a couple of poli-sci people, using sports as soft power is a fairly common theme. It's just a way and this will be coming up a lot more in the next few slides. It's a way for a country to say, we're really good at things. And just as a little insert, you think about all the East Germans and Eastern Bloc people doping their women to help them kick butt. They weren't doing that so that, Eddie Pells could win a gold medal. They were doing that to show that East Germany is better than West Germany, And this was an American win. So a few months later, this was still when they had the Winter and the Summer Olympics in the same year. Probably one of the worst mixes of politics and the Olympics came up when President Carter decided to pull the U.S. to boycott the Moscow Olympics. That was a reaction to the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. We were caught up in a mire in Iran. We had 1980 was not a good year in the U.S. And so Carter said to protest that he would pull that we weren't going to send a team to the 1980 Olympics. Now, that turns out to be one of the most, one of the biggest mistakes ever made, because basically what you did was robbed dozens of athletes who had worked their whole life because I'm going to go to the Olympics, have a chance to do it. What was interesting, because Carter died maybe last year, I was researching some of this stuff and I was looking at some of the contemporaneous material about this, and there really was not a huge outcry about any of this. There was one thing that you should take from that, which was that nobody really listened to the athletes. I think had they, this might have turned out a lot different. But then one of the sort of things that came out of it is, there was a wrestler maybe who finally had a chance to meet President Carter like on a random airplane flight, and he said, I was a 1980 Olympian, and Carter said, did you play for the hockey team? And he said, no, I was a wrestler. And Carter looked down very glumly and said, I made a big mistake there. And that was just the intersection that impacted the Olympics in 1984. And this is Will's favorite.
Okay,
spiel.
so this is Mary Lou Retton. And in 1984, I was 10 years old. And in response to the United States and some Western nations not going to Moscow in 1980, the Eastern Bloc nations, led by the Soviet Union, decided, well, you know what, we're not going to go to LA in 84. 10-year-old me had no knowledge, like I could care less, right? I did not know. And it's interesting when we talk about, soft power being like a tool of the host country in the Olympics. When I think about now, my fascination with the Olympics started over the 2 weeks of these games. And one of the reasons, it started for two reasons. Like, I've always been into sports, but it also was we won a ton of medals at those Olympics. I believe 173 in all, including 83 gold medals, which was a record then. There's far more disciplines now, so there's more medals being handed out. And if you're 10 years old in Waldorf, Maryland, and you're watching Mary Lou Retton win a gold medal and beat the Romanians, I was so obsessed, I was watching rowing on my summer break at 10 o'clock in the morning, right? I mean, that is the power of the Olympics. But when I was thinking about researching this, and I was like, what am I going to say about this? And I was looking for some political stuff, but the reality is I thought more internally about how it impacted me at that age. And it reinforced, I don't know if people have seen Team America World Police, I'm not going to curse here, but America, bleep yeah, right? And look, it happens every single host country of the Olympics. That is the impact it has on certain citizens. If you're sort of a somewhat, sports mad, but maybe not politically savvy 10-year-old, you think the Olympics are the best thing ever, and we're the best thing ever in the Olympics, so we must be the best thing ever in the history of anything. And to sort of reinforce something we've talked about regularly, that is sort of one of the many goals of the host nations. That is the influence. And I would imagine that there were folks watching these Olympics in different countries go, man, the Americans got their stuff together, man. I really want to go to America. And that is sort of one of the things that play here. And Mary Lou, and one of the ironies here is growing up in Maryland, my sister was a gymnast, pretty good one. I got dragged to many, many, many gym meets between the ages of maybe 10 and 15. She's a few years younger than I am. And I hated it. I can recite her floor routine from when she was compulsory floor routine from she was 10 or 11 years old right now. If I won't, but I could. And the irony is now I've covered gymnastics at every Olympics since 2012. I covered in between the games. And she thinks it's hysterical. But that is the power of the Olympics in terms of a soft power. I'm just telling you, that was my own personal experience. I was drawn to the Olympics by watching people in white and blue kick a bunch of butt and hear the Star-Spangled Banner 83 times in a couple of weeks.
Okay. All right, we're going to kick it in. This was, I think we were going to talk about Atlanta. There was a bombing at Centennial Square, or whatever it was called. Centennial Park. We're going to just kind of quickly go through this, only other than to say, news, with Munich. I mean, news happens at these things, and a lot of times it gets twisted into political theater. This was a bigger deal. This was the 2002 Olympics, which was about 5 months after 9/11, and it's kind of funny that a lot of you people, a lot of the kids in here were not alive for that, but this is the flag that they took from the World Trade Center and they brought it into the opening ceremony. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house at that point. This was a very fraught time in the United States, and I think this was one of the rare times where it seemed like pretty much everybody was pulling in the same direction, not just in the US, but around the world. And the luck of the draw was that, the Olympics were being held in the United States. That's the last time they've been here. We were going through some struggles. I mean, there were issues around that thing about security, and a lot of people were afraid to go to these things. They put on a pretty good show, but it was a way to make a country heal. And the soft power element of it is that the U.S. did really, really well there, which is something you'll see. You'll always see home countries doing very, very well when they're at home. Part of that is home field advantage, but part of it, and we'll talk about this with Russia, is that, you get ready a little bit. You spend a little more money and a little more time getting ready for one at home because you want it to be good. But this was just I think this was a pretty emotional Olympics, and it was political, but it was also a sign on the good end of how the Olympics can bring you together in a peaceful gathering of nations. All right, then we're moving to China.
This is Beijing.
Yeah, that was cool, by the way.
I thought this was yours.
Oh, okay. So then we did a couple that
Right.
stuff happened. Then this is 2008. Do you guys know this is the Bird's Nest, the big stadium in China? And if you think about China about 20 years ago, we didn't really know that much about it. It was still pretty closed society. And China, and the IOC was happy to go along with this, use this as their welcoming the world, Nobody had really taken a look at China in a real way, where they had invited the whole world to just come over. Now, was it a free society where journalists could just go do whatever they wanted? Not at all. But could journalists go over there and tell some stories about China? Could we kind of see how those people lived a little bit more than maybe we had over the last, 1,000 years? Absolutely. China leaned into that. We now look at China as kind of a threat, a key competitor. Back then, we didn't really look at them like this, but I think this might have been kind of the start of China's rise up the economic ladder, okay? And the Olympics sort of got leveraged by both sides. China wanted it to bring the world there, and the IOC wanted to get 1 billion or 2 billion more sports fans on its side. And going back to the Eileen Gu conversation, I mean, a lot of that has worked. We'll have another slide or a little more talk about the next Chinese Olympics, which is a lot different scene. But this one was definitely a thing where governments and sports organizations were working together very much, and to say that there wasn't a political connection to the Olympics here, I mean, it just wouldn't be accurate.
All right.
All right, now where am I going?
Nope, back one. Okay. So I looked at my watch. Obviously, we're running long. We'll try to speed it up here. This is 2014 Olympics in Russia. In Sochi, Russia, there's Vladimir Putin, there's Thomas Bach. And to Eddie's point, you want to do really well in the home games. And this is maybe the fallout of 20 years out, 22-ish years after the fall of the Soviet Union. This is Putin saying, hey, baby, Russia's back. They also hosted the World Cup that year, later that year. And Eddie talked about the importance of home countries wanting to do well. Well, guess what happened at the 2014 Olympics? 335 Russian athletes eventually, not in the moment, but eventually tested positive or were for doping. And it didn't happen in the moment. It happened piecemeal over the next couple of years as the investigation played out. And so the IOC was like, well, we're going to, eventually we're going to ban them for 4 years. They can't compete underneath the Russian flag, whatever. We think the Russians have learned their lesson. Well, let me tell you, in 2021 at the Tokyo Olympics, they were competing they were ROC. If you looked on the competition map or the competition sheet, it didn't say RUS, which is usually what it says. It said ROC, Russia Olympic Committee. Do you think the Russians gave a damn that the flag wasn't up there? I covered gymnastics. Their women's team and their men's team both won the Olympics in the team finals. And I walk into the men's press conference afterwards, and they're FaceTiming with Putin as this is happening, an hour after they won. So the reality is Russia didn't care. Let's say they lost some medals in 2014. The IOC, they're going to ban it, whatever. We don't really care. Part of the problem that the IOC and the CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is sort of like oversees sort of all the legal challenges throughout the Olympic movement, it's sort of toothless, right? Like it is unfortunately sort of toothless. And I know we're speeding up here. But no. But I wanted to say one more thing, and he's going to hate this, but I told Stacey I was going off script. 2014, we're covering the Olympics. I didn't feel great. One night, we were covering extreme sports together. We had two options to go home. We could either take the bus down these hairpin turns back into the village. Eddie struggles with a little bit of motion sickness. I wasn't feeling great 2 weeks in. We wanted to take the big 700 and some steps up to the top. There was a gondola. You could go down the village, and you could go down the mountain and see the village in front of you. Great. It took us an hour. Why did it take us an hour? Look at this guy. Look at this guy. Did it take an hour because of this guy? No.
This is a story about how I saved Will's life, by the way.
I could not go up, what were the flights of? They were concrete steps, but it was like you go up like 7 steps, and then you had like a little landing, up the mountain. It took us an hour, and I'm standing there baffled. I'm 39 years old, 38 years old. And I got 2 young kids, but I'm like, I don't know why I feel so poorly. But it took me an hour. Some folks would have left. Some people would have said, shoot up a flare when you get to the top. I'll know to look for you, whatever. Eddie stayed with me every step of the way. And as we're going down the mountain, he's like, in the gondola, he's like, dude, you got to go get yourself checked out. And I'm like, what? I would say that really drove home. I mean, his patience and kindness, and I still think about that hour frequently. The anniversary of this was just a couple of weeks ago. I came home, I got tested, I got diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma called Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia, which sounds terrifying as hell. The good news is that it's not. It's also, I could win hearts and minds here by saying it's incurable, and I'm a big paragon of strength and power. The reality is it's just gross. It's so lazy, it grows so slowly, it doesn't really kill you. You kind of die with it. But, I just wanted to get, this guy, he downplays this. We talk about this every once in a while. I'm fine now. I take 2 pills. One, I was supposed to take the second one in 9 minutes. I'm not going to. I'll catch it later. But if you're, when you talk about, we talk about journalism as a whole, one of the reasons I love it, one of the reasons I love the Olympics specifically is because it allows me to work with my colleagues. I grew up in newspapers. I worked in newspapers. I still am friends with my friends from the newspaper era. But, Eddie did sort of save my life that night, but it's his kindness in that moment, because that was really, I'm not trying to get emotional, but it was really, really tough not knowing, being on the other side of the world from your family and not knowing what the hell is wrong with you. I had nicked myself shaving a couple of days before, and it took 25 minutes to bleed, to stop bleeding, because I had literally no platelets. And I didn't know that. I had no idea that happened. So I just wanted to give this guy his flowers. He would have done it for anybody, but he didn't do it for anybody. He did it for me. And, he didn't say, it wasn't like the episode of The Pit. It wasn't at the end of the life there or anything like that. But it was pretty gross. I came home. Took a blood test a few days later. I was in the ICU for a little bit. I got a bunch of blood. I went into treatment. I'm good now. But I just wanted to say, this is what happened here is sort of symptomatic of sort of what happens. The IOC wants to be the big baddie, and we want to, they also have this decree that there's no wars we don't want any wars during the Olympics. Can everybody just put their guns down for a couple weeks? Well, what happened about a week after we left fine Sochi, Russia?
They invaded Ukraine.
Or Crimea.
Or Crimea, yeah, they took over Ukraine. Will, that was really nice, and I think that's where we should, we have a little more material, but I think if people want questions, we can open it up to that. If not, we can keep on going.
Well, we'll speed it up.
Okay.
Because they've been alive for most of this stuff.
Okay, but
so
thank you for that. Let's skip Rio.
All I'll say about
okay?
Rio is they spent a ton of money, and then the second we left, it went to crap, and that is happening a lot. Hell, the velodrome, which I think is probably pictured here, caught on fire literally yesterday. But that's sort of symbolic of the large, like sort of the blatant corruption. A lot of people went in Brazil, and the government went to prison after this. The IOC is finding out that, and host countries are finding out that really the cost is it's not worth it anymore, and the IOC going forward is going to have to probably come to a rotation because countries are realizing it's just not worth the expense.
Yeah, Rio was an example of trying to open up, much like we were talking about Beijing, trying to open up the Olympics to another part of the world, which is a beautiful thought, but when half the people in your city can't afford their groceries, you don't need to be spending $1.6 billion, whatever. That's just me on the soapbox. Gwen Berry, anybody ever heard of her? Okay, this was in around 20.
Gwen, Ed?
Gwen's the one on the left, who's sort of got the shirt over her head. So around 2019, when we were getting ready for the 2020 Olympics, we were starting to get into more social protest kind of issues. Gwen went to the Pan Am Games, which was like a mini Olympics, and she actually raised her fist on the medal stand, much like Tommy Smith and John Carlos, which triggered a whole bunch of panic about what are we going to do if this happens again. And this was in kind of the Kaepernick era where everybody was getting very wanting to use their platform again. There was all kinds of debate and discussion about how to interpret Rule 50. She went to Olympic trials, and this is a longer story, but basically when she came out to get her medal, they were playing the national anthem to start the day's events, and while Deanna Price and the silver medalists were doing that, she turned away from the podium. This was also during COVID, and there were all kinds of things going on. So this became a very big issue, and it was the USOPC was very afraid of this. What are we going to do? But then COVID hit, and the Olympics got postponed by another year, and then the issue at the Olympics was just, how are we ever going to do the Olympics? And that gives me a small segue into, we went to Tokyo in 2021, and we had to get tested every day, and it was not very much fun. Then we went back to China in 2022, where it was very restrictive, and you had bubbles, and you had to go get tested every day and scan your credential. You had to essentially turn your cell phone over. And it was so ironic because it was 14 years after China wanted to be this welcoming teddy bear. And now all of a sudden they're running like the most restrictive, under surveillance Olympics ever in an authoritarian country. And it was sort of like, that's really what they like. They're very good at that. They put on a very good show for a COVID thing where the only thing that we cared about was not having a COVID outbreak. But it was kind of sad, and our guy Mark McMorris said that was sports prison, basically. He said it was a version of sports prison. And that leads us to, we had a couple good Olympics since then, and then this is our next one, and that's where...
All right, so the Olympics are going to go to LA for the third time in 2 years. I think I had it I think it's 857 days are the opening ceremonies. Mm-hmm. The politics around these games have already started. There's a lot of people in LA that don't want the games there because citing, like, why are we spending billions of dollars on this when obviously, like, there's an unhoused persons issue among many issues in Southern California. And one of the other places we've seen the political side already kind of raise its head is sort of the IOC announcing last week or the week before that it is banning trans female athletes from competing at the Olympics. This is after President Trump's executive order, the Keeping Women Out of Sports, or Men Out of Women's Sports executive order that he signed shortly after he took office. I ended up writing a fair bit about that a year ago. I'll be honest with you, like, this is a solution in search of a problem. Eddie and I know this. There's been exactly one out trans female athlete to compete at the Olympics in the history of the Olympics, and I am going to call this up because I just want to, that was in a woman named Laurel Hubbard for New Zealand in 2021 in Tokyo, and she's a weightlifter. And she didn't play. She could not complete a lift. This is what she said after. The IOC had no problems with this. And hold on, And this is what she said about the IOC after. This is only, about 4.5 years ago? She thanked the IOC for, quote, really affirming their commitment to the principles of Olympism, which I don't even know that's a word, and establishing that sport is something for all people. It is inclusive. It is accessible. That was in August of 2021. We are less than 5 years removed from that, and that could literally not be further from the current reality. I'm not gonna inject politics into this as much as I can. I'm just gonna tell you.
It's about politics.
Well, but I mean, I've done some reporting in this space in the last year and a half, and I can tell you that the people in the trans community that compete, whether they are Division III cross-country runners or they're people at the local gymnastics club, they are not, whatever they're not doing this to win. The 99.9995% of the people in this space, they're doing it to be seen for who they are in a space that has always been welcoming to them before they transitioned. And the problem, I'm going to allow that at the upper levels, at the elite levels of sport, there is a conversation to be had about inherent advantages of athletes that were born male competing as female, even if they've had all of the hormone therapy. That is a topic of discussion. But the problem is there aren't 30 people that are going to come in here and say, hey, that are trans females and say, hey, I want to be on the U.S. Olympic team in 2028. That's not going to happen. But the problem with this messaging is, in my opinion, and this I don't really care. We're cooking here, baby. Is the message that it sends to the people in that community at large, the othering of that community at large. As somebody I've got people that I interviewed that I now consider friends that are literally competing this week at a gymnastics meet, like a recreational gymnastics meet in Birmingham, Alabama, who I got a chance to know last year while reporting on a couple of stories. And the way that these edicts from on high make them feel less than is sort of the exact opposite of what my opinion of what the Olympic movement should be. I'm not saying that there needs to be a decree where, like I said, there is a conversation to be had at the very, very highest levels of sport. But if the Olympic movement, which wants to be about more than the Olympics, it would have kept its hands, in my opinion, out of this. And partly because, as I said, it's a solution in search of a problem. But I will say this, and since I wrote the end here, can I just try to keep?
Absolutely.
I just kind of wrap it up. So, look, my hope is Eddie and I will be in LA in 2.5 years. We probably will be. Maybe it's the last hurrah. The Olympic motto, and I had it written down. It's the Latin, but Mr. Previs, my Latin teacher in high school, will be upset that I did not want to dare try to pronounce it here. The English translation is faster, higher, stronger, together. I am pretty sure that the first three we are definitely going to see in LA. My hope is, as a human being on this earth, not as an American citizen, not even as a journalist, is that the together part, there's a little more of that, and part of that together part is allowing the athletes to be themselves and to express themselves without being Rule 50'd out of it. And with that, by the way, follow us. We are the Associated Press. This is like where the bosses put all of our stuff. And I would say follow me. Ed doesn't do social media because he's smarter than me. Don't follow me on X because it's obnoxious. Threads is a little more my vibe these days because the algorithm knows me. But look, we appreciate you guys. The Olympics are close to Eddie and I's heart. We care a lot about the people in that space, and we're thankful for the opportunity to come here and talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
We have time for a few questions if anyone has one before we. All right.
Oh, of course it's Stacy's kid. Of course.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Sochi was a week before the invasion of Crimea, and you began the lecture with the discussion of of Ukraine and their delegation protesting. At Sochi, did you notice any like hint that the invasion would happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I think I remember this pretty vividly. The way that I got to Russia that time, I think I flew from Pittsburgh to JFK or LaGuardia, I can't remember, to Moscow and then to Sochi. And Sochi's a few hours south of Moscow. And we could not fly over Crimea. Like, we had to fly around it. I believe, or was it Ukraine?
The other thing I remember was, it wasn't us, but there were actually some people, I think, who got, in our group, who got to Sochi with a connection through Kiev, believe it or not. And I remember that being a discussion of they were going to have to get different flights. There was enough news trickling around before that, like clearly it was in the air that they might do that.
And I would just add, like, sort of, to me, Eddie and I's own personal experience at Sochi, when we talk about sort of the people that live there, there is a sameness to the Olympics. Eddie has a saying, he calls it Olympic land. Like, that there is sort of a sameness, the signage is the same, but everybody, like, pretty much when we go, they want us to, everybody wants to be the best hosts. They want us to leave and think this is the best place ever. What was telling about Sochi was we had a beautiful apartment that was supposed to be part of ended up being part of a ski resort or whatever. And we bought some food at the market down there, and the help would clean it up, where they would clean up the place when we would go up and spend 12, 14 hours on the mountain, and then they would help themselves to some of our food, and which was fine. Like it was fun. We were on per diem. The point wasn't that they stole from us. The point was that they felt compelled to do it, and it made us wonder, like, what is their life like back when we're gone? And what I do remember very vividly about that Olympics specifically, we didn't leave that year until Tuesday, the Tuesday after the closing ceremonies. And like Monday, we're walking around and we're getting souvenirs, and everybody's happy. The Russians are still polite. Mm-hmm. And on Tuesday, they were like, get the hell out of here, right? And I think that is sort of telling in general, I think, of what some of these host cities are in terms of, like, they want to be happy, they want to do what they can to exercise their soft power. There comes to a point where they've done their bit. Now they got to figure out how the hell they're going to pay for this, and please go home. Mm-hmm. I just like saying that. I just like telling that story.
I know it tends to be a very American idea that we need to keep politics out of sports. I know that anecdotally and from like sports business classes I've taken in the past. I'm curious how you think that might conflict with the narrative around the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics that are certain to be very political.
I think this was probably what I would have said after Will's thing. It's also the World Cup this year, okay? The biggest thing that everybody wants to do right now, if you're running a major international event, is to keep the White House happy. The transgender thing, we can talk about whether that should be, what the ins and outs of it are, but as soon as Trump signed his executive order, like the first two major sports organizations to get in line was the NCAA and the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee had spent years basically saying what Will said out of the weightlifters quote, we're for inclusion and equity. And the second that Trump did that, or not the second, but within about a month, they changed their tune. And it's a little cynical. I don't know if we want to go down this road, but Casey Wasserman, who's running the LA 28 Olympics, whose name was found in the Epstein files, I'm not sure I want to get into that whole thing, but he was a hardcore Democrat who flew to the White House to present President Trump with a set of 1984 Olympic medals. Their biggest goal is like, we're spending a couple $2 billion to put this thing on, and we want to make sure that everything goes well. And the World Cup, there's a ton of immigration issues around that, right? Like if you're rooting for Congo, are you going to actually want to come to here? Are you going to get in? Are you going to be able to get out? And so everybody right now, I think, and again, I'm not putting a value on this, I'm just telling you how it is. It's a scramble to make sure that our government is signing on to these events.
And I would say, just to add to that, two things. I think by that point, A, who knows where the hell is going to be going on, A. B, I think the athletes will be empowered. I think, we're going to want to lean, as much as we're going to want to, be gracious hosts, I also think the athletes that have something to say are going to be free to say it. And the only other thing I'll say about, in one night in Cortina, I was having dinner, a couple beers with some friends of mine. We met some Olympic volunteers, young people, a couple people from Albania. Young woman was leader of the group. She was 24 years old. She had been to the World Cup a few years ago. She had done the Summer Olympics in Paris. And I asked her, I said, well, you're gonna volunteer in LA? And she's like, no. And I'm like, well, why not? I mean, this is literally her job. She kind of is almost like a nomad, going from big event to big event, helping these hosts carry it on. She was the Euro, or what's the Euros? Is that what they call the soccer?
Yeah,
they have in Europe. Like, she'd done that. She'd done the Champions League stuff. And she said, no, because I don't know if I go there, if I'm gonna be able to come home. And I'm not sure that is, the message. I don't know if that is reflective of the Olympic movement either.
So I have a question that's not really political, but I just kind of want to get your opinion on this. We saw what the flag football team did to the NFL players, and I know that the sport is growing rather fast internationally, but do you think it's something that could be competitive in the Olympics?
Would the U.S. be competitive, or? Yeah, I mean, it does fit into this conversation, because this is a way for an American sport, I mean, let's be honest, the NFL is working with the LA organizing committee and the IOC to expand the reach of football, basically. I think there's also an equity issue, because now we can get women involved. And I will say, like, my wife watches flag football and goes, God, I wish that would have been around when I was in high school. That would have been my sport. So there's some legitimate reasons to bring it. It's hard for me to, I think you have to look at it as a new sport. It's, everybody thought the NFL players would kick butt in that, and they lost to a bunch of people playing flag football. The way I would look at it is, I don't know if anyone's seen 3-on-3 basketball got introduced to the Olympics in Tokyo. That was a way to bring more countries into it, so that it wasn't like the US and Serbia winning every year. So there will be countries that will invest in this sport to try to win a medal. And so the conventional, it's not football, it's flag football. You know what I'm saying? So I would guess the US would probably win, but I think there are enough countries who will see an opportunity there to get on the medal stand that they'll invest, and it'll be I don't really give one crap about watching that, and I'm cynical, but I definitely think it'll be a competition.
And the only thing I would add to that is, I think we're going to see a lot of athletes from the other countries that enter who have athletes. A lot of the other countries that enter will have athletes who have players that are American and will cite their heritage.
Yeah, like their great
as an ability to kind of like to sort of get onto team. We saw this with the World Baseball Classic, right? Like, not everybody. Like, there wasn't a team, like the Israeli team wasn't filled with a bunch of
it was
guys that live in Israel. It was people who had heritage back in that country. So that's probably to create a level-ish playing field. I would imagine that's probably going to be the case.
So going back to kind of the appeasing of like the countries, I know that the Olympics has that kind of like, I don't know if it's called the honeymoon rule or whatever, where like they're not allowed, no wars are allowed to occur during like that time period. And I know that Russia was penalized for everything that happened with Ukraine. And I know that the US recently just broke that. And I kind of wonder what you think is going to happen and how that's going to reflect on the Olympics if they don't really take a stand on that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I think the odds of them doing anything about the U.S. being wherever we are in 2 years is probably zero. There were when the Russia invaded Ukraine, there were a couple sports. Track and field was the biggest one. And they actually still don't let Russians into track and field. They were not at the last Olympics.
Gymnastics too.
And gymnastics, and they weren't at the World Championships. And the reason that they said is because, how can you let athletes from a country that are invading another country and making life impossible for those athletes come compete against them? There's a pretty good argument there. That's the true argument. But let's just talk about real life. There is like zero chance that if we're still active in Iran in 2 years that they're going to say America can't come to the Olympics in America. It's just not going to happen. It's called the Olympic truce. I think it's the best idea out there, and I think it is almost not worth the paper it's written on.
I got nothing on that one, man. That's all you.
You got nothing on that one? Okay. All right.
I'm German and American, so I just want to kind of point out, like what you see in the media in other countries may be very different from what you see in the American media. So, for example, there's a lot of talk. I mean, people are very upset with Infantino, whatever his name is, giving
FIFA,
Trump this FIFA Peace Prize.
Yeah.
And because of what's going on here, I read a lot in the German media that a lot of Germans just basically want to boycott. I mean, basically not watch it. They don't want them to get any advertising money. That they're just not. Even though Germany is a world-leading soccer, not these days. They're not as great as they used to be, but still pretty good. They just don't want to even watch it. They don't want to have nothing to do with it. So it's kind of interesting, this difference. The other difference I also want to point out is the kind of money that countries spend is so different. I mean, I read one time, I know it's really true, that any university in the United States that has a lot of big sports programs, let's say Stanford, University of Michigan, spends more money on their sports than the entire country of Germany for their Olympic. So that's kind of the dimension of the difference of importance. I mean, the joke is at my university when I was my undergrad in Germany, the biggest sport we did was the beer relay. You ran across the soccer field, had to drink 2 steins of beer and run back. So people just don't, I mean, they get a little bit patriotic maybe, when they do the luge or whatever, or the bobsled, or biathlon is a big one, but otherwise, it doesn't have that same level. But so now with this all going on, they're basically just probably a lot of them just not even going to watch it.
Yeah, no, I actually totally, I hear that and I see that all the time. Not everybody's on board with what's going on here. I also think the investment is really interesting. We've been talking, some of the classes, we've been talking about NIL. And, when you look at the college system that feeds into American Olympic sports, America spends a lot more money on all of this stuff than any European country. It just comes from a different place, right? But I think the points you make are really valid. I would say the other thing is, like, almost before every Olympics, there's something about, we should boycott these Olympics. We should we shouldn't go to China. Remember, that was a big thing. We're not going to go to China. The one thing that I just think about that, when we were talking about the Afghanistan thing with the Soviet Union, is that, like, ultimately it's the athlete's chance to compete in the World Cup. Now, if people don't want to watch it, that's fine. But you always have to look when you're thinking about, not going, of like, who is the ultimate, who's making the real sacrifice to make a political point sometimes. That's why that really hasn't happened a lot since the 80s.
I mean, the only thing I would say is, like, if these fans in Germany or whatever country, if they are not fans of sort of what's going on with the host country of any major event. Dick Ebersol, who was the producer, produced 1 billion Olympics for NBC, has a famous quote, and it's like, the answer to all of your questions is money. And if you want to get the IOC's attention, if you want to get FIFA's attention, in these host countries that they pick in these places that maybe aren't great, if the fans don't show up, if the TV ratings aren't what they are, and if the stands are half full, that will get the attention more of those organizations than, to be honest with you, from a change standpoint, than maybe anything that we showed you here today was. I mean, that's just the reality of it. The reality of is that the Olympics, for lack of a better phrase, they're a boondoggle, right? And what the IOC is learning is that, and FIFA is probably going to learn going forward, is that not everybody wants to host it anymore. We saw heck, back 50 years ago, Denver was supposed to have a bid for the '76 Olympics, and
They
there was
had it.
And
They gave it back. They didn't.
right,
Yeah.
LA or Boston was, what was Boston,
20. They were supposed to be 24. They were the U.S. candidate, and they
there
dropped
was an
out.
insurrection there.
And that was the thing, kind of expanding on this point. The COVID Olympics in Tokyo and China, talk about viewership. I mean, there was a big crisis about whether this industry could keep going. The ratings were awful. They'd gotten to the point where they really couldn't even find a city to bid for the Winter Olympics at all, and the summer thing wasn't looking very good either. And, Paris, and to some extent, the ones we just finished, through I don't even know why it happened, but the viewership went up, everybody got happy again, we all wanted to watch the Olympics again. And that's where we are now. So they feel like they've been saved a little bit. Now, FAFO, I don't know what I don't know what's going to happen in LA. I don't know if we're going to turn this into a shit show and everybody's going to turn against it again. I mean, that's the big question. But they got a reprieve, because if Paris would have had ratings like Tokyo, we would be having a different seminar here talking about are these Olympics going to be going on in 10 years? I think we've gotten past that, but nothing's forever. These things cost way too much to put on. I think that's one thing. And depending on how toxic your politics get, that could decide how people react to them. So.
We have one last question for this evening.
Okay.
You touched on it a little bit there about kind of cities and their incentives to want to bid to host the Olympics in the future moving forward. And you talked a little bit about Rio, kind of the botching of that. I mean, what's, in your opinion, the future outlook on how to find more places to get to have the Olympics? I mean, it seems more and more that it's less of a benefit to the places hosting it than it should be. Obviously, if you're China or you're somewhere that has a level of resources to spend money and those resources on something like the Olympics, it may benefit you. But is there a sustainable approach that you think can be reached moving forward? And if not, what is the solution that you think they're going to find?
You want me
Well, since you're Mr. Olympics, and I'll let you have the last word here, I would just say that I firmly believe, I mean, Eddie's right. I mean, I remember being in Rio at the last night when we were done in sort of celebratory mood, and go to a Brazilian steakhouse, have a great opulent meal with some friends of mine that work for USA Today and some other places. And getting the Uber to leave, the media village is maybe, 2 miles away. And we get out of the steakhouse, and the Uber driver is taking us in the most direct route. And we literally go 2 blocks, and we're in the middle of a favela, which is a ghetto. The poverty, so close to sort of this level of opulence was insane to me. And then as we got closer to the media village, the cab driver goes, or the Uber driver goes, oh, and this is the end of where the metro station was supposed to get to, but it didn't get, it's 2 miles away. They were supposed to build this as part of this thing, right? I say that to say this, the common sense solution is to come up with a rotation of, 4 host countries for the Winter Olympics, 4 host countries for the Summer Olympics, sustainable venues, and we just that is the way to do it. The IOC is not there yet, as evidenced by some of the places that are probably going to bid for 2036, right?
Yeah.
We're talking maybe India,
in the Middle East.
Middle Qatar, which just hosted the World Cup in 23 or 22 or whatever. I think that the Olympics are not going to get to that point though until they run out of places. And I would even say build in like like sort of a mystery guest fifth country that maybe every 20 years it goes to like some new place, right? To give it, because we don't know. But Eddie's right, nothing's forever. And the idea that countries are going to continue, they're going to continue to find countries that are going to be willing to foot the bill for this, it's just going to stop. Like I firmly believe that.
And I would pretty much would have said what Will. I think one other thing, I think the Winter Olympics is a little bit different conversation because, and you might have seen some of this climate change as I mean, we're getting down to realistically, you know, where you used to be able to maybe go to 18 places, you're down to about 8. Okay, like I don't know. I live in the West, so I mean, winter was a disaster in Colorado and Utah this year. Now, would they have made the Winter Olympics work in Utah while it was 45 degrees every day and there was no natural snow? Yes, they would have pumped, but the tons of artificial snow, which they do anyway, and we would have made it go. But so I think the Winter Olympics, in addition to being more of a money loser, has this whole environmental thing slapped onto it. I think what Will says about, you know, I won't even say this nicely, finding cities that have big enough egos to be able to bring the Olympics there is what you need. And one thing, you know, going back to Europe, they're all basically putting them out to referendums, and all the European people are saying no thanks. So like a Summer Olympics, you know, other than Paris, which is a big ego, or London that might want to do it again, but it's not going to end up in Berlin or you know, there's just a lot of places that are being taken out of the mix. It costs too much, and the economic benefit, you know, I'm not an economist, but I don't believe half the stuff I read about that.
And before we finish up here, I like listening to the Q&A. It sounds like Eddie and I are a couple of jaded old unks.
I love it, yeah. I can't wait to go back.
Oh my God, they sent us to the Olympics again.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing ever. I want to stress, the reason that the Olympics endure amid, were we still recording? Can I curse now? Amid all the bullshit that goes along outside of it on the periphery, the athletes, the athletes save them every single time.
I totally agree.
I've been to 8 or 9 of these things. Ed's been to more than a dozen. And if we had another 4 hours, we wouldn't have enough time. We don't. Thankfully, we don't. We would still be. Eddie and I would have enough material to talk about the people that we've met, the stories that we've told. The Olympics are for all of the crap that goes with it. The athletes themselves always rescue it by being gracious, by being humble, by being interesting, by being trusting, by doing
great, spectacular things that you think could happen.
And so they are, you know, I can't even remember what's it. And it is worth saving or whatever. I mean, I think you know, whatever that thing is, it's worth and it's worth saving. They're not in crisis, but I think like as much as you can hear all the stuff we've talked about the last hour and a half, like it is special. There is nothing like it. That's why we're talking about even today at lunch, or, you know, it went in 28 for sure, but who knows about 30, 32 if that's my last one. The reality is, if the AP employs me, as long as it employs me, I will walk on all the hot calls and I'll do all the bullshit they ask me to do if it means I get to go to the next one. Because it is crack. It is an addictive drug. There is nothing better in the world, in my professional experience, than walking into an Olympic venue, especially on the day of a big event when you know the entire world is watching and you're going to see history made. There is just nothing like it.
Good way to end it.
Excellent way to end. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you get to enjoy the rest of this lovely evening. Good night.